everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're back on the Updates Directed dev server and it's time to have a look at a new aircraft. This is the F-8E, which is coming to the American tech tree, and also at the same time there is a French F-8E as well, which is coming in. The major differences between them are the secondary armaments, where the F-8E FN gets access to 2 Magic air-to-air missiles in the form of the IR-guided ones with a maximum overload of 30 Gs. It also gets the R530s and also the R530Es. So if you prefer that, then, well, that's pretty good. You know, the FN gets access to these missiles, only 2 of them, but they should be very competent, whereas the F-8E has a lot more options and also just general armament for itself. The F-8E is powered by the Allison TF41A1 engine, giving it 8,520 kgf for afterburner thrust. The wings are made of fuel, the center is made of fuel, and the front is made out of a pilot who has access to a radar, the APQ-50, that you can find here. It also lists what is available for it, and also 4 20mm Browning Colt Mark 12s. So the same armament that you see on the other Crusader, and generally this armament is very good. It works incredibly well. So the aircraft is very much set up very similarly to the other Crusader, but the major difference is the skin on the outside and also the weaponry it gets access to. So the F-8E for the Americans gets access to a bunch of bombs, gets access to a bunch of rockets, bullpups, and also AIM-9Bs and Ds. It does start off with rockets as a standard, so it does get 2 AIM-9Bs, which is really nice for it, and also you can upgrade that to AIM-9Ds, and you can get 4 of them in total. So by getting the modification, you can get more missiles and get more capable ones. The AIM-9Ds can turn at 18 Gs, which is quite nice, and have a long launch range, but they're never going to get there. So, you know, they're pretty much middle of the road missiles when it comes to the game, but at 10.0 they're completely fine. It also has aspects of tons of different bombs, up to 2,000 pounders, which are obviously quite meaty, has 1,000 pounders and also even some different ones, as you can see. These ones have a TN2 equivalent of 272, where these have exactly the same, they just for some reason are different colors. Gets access to bullpups as well, 2 of them in total. You can actually run the Sidewinders with the bullpups, which I think is going to be my favorite lineup for ground realistic. Then also you can bring along some rockets as well, and the rockets are actually pretty cool because they're in this like centrally mounted pod in the center. You can see it here, very similar to what we see from the French side of things, so we can check that out as well. There's a lot of nice things to like about this machine when it comes to its secondaries. Doesn't get access to countermeasures though, so no flares and also no access to chaff, which is a little bit rough for it, not gonna lie. I wish it did have access to those things, but maybe in the future we'll get some more vehicles which have access to that stuff. I'll show you what the rocket actually looks like in game. This thing doesn't have its cockpit modeled yet, so hopefully at some point it does get that. I'm sure it will. The major differences between this and the earlier Crusader are slight differences when it comes to the slats and also its general airframe. There are minor differences, so it should play very similar to it in certain ways. I personally am looking forward to getting into the Crusaders just because of the fact that now they reduced a lot of the research for them, so it's going to be quite nice to do. So to show you the rockets, you can see they actually tip out here and you fire them in very large sets. Basically you fire them in 2 rows, one firing 16 and the next one firing 16 too, so it's definitely something which is kind of interesting. You also have bullpups as well, so you can use that on ground units if you want, and of course the AIM-9Ds that we talked about before. So this thing has access to all of the arsenal that you can get. It also has the standard air brake that you see on the Crusader, which is really nice to see, and also the leading edge as well. So just to show you the AIM-9Ds, and their general use. Obviously the MiG is just going in a straight line, so it's not really going to show anything. That missile probably won't even hit. But I really like the fact that it has this like rocket setup in the center, keeping it more streamlined and keeping it more set up. I also like the fact that it has, you know, the afterburner and the cone at the back, which expands. I always like the little areas there. It also has the tail hook, and once again, so the rockets, they pop out. I wonder, can you do the air brake? Yeah, you can still do the air brake while the rockets are there. Okay, that's really cool. And then you just fire them off all in one. It's going to be a centrally launched thing, so you don't have to worry too much about convergence, and it's just going to be a wonderful time overall. So for me, when we have a look at this machine and its secondary armaments, that to me is kind of where it's going to shine. So probably useful in ground. You know, 10.0, there is, I suppose, not the best lineup anymore, but you could bring it in at 10.3 with the IPM1, the M1A1, maybe even 10.7. If you want to bring it into that area. It's probably not going to be as strong, unfortunately, but there you go. You can see the center raise, just like the other Crusaders. They've slightly changed it on this one compared to the other ones, so it should increase drag a little bit. Obviously this thing is designed to land on carriers, but can land normally as well. And plop, there you go. Going a little bit fast, so we're probably going to go over the other side, but you get the idea. And it's nice to see it all modeled for the Crusader. I know a lot of people who are looking forward to the one which got added last time, and this is obviously the slightly better version of it, so I'm sure many people are going to enjoy it as well. When it comes to vehicles like this, in especially air realistic, because in ground realistic I can get how it can be used, you know, especially with the bullpups and being able to bring on missiles as well, so you can use it in a way where you can counter other vehicles that come in. One of the only issues Well then, there's just an F-4E JK here. There's a nice little little bit of little tidbit of information there. But anyway, when it comes to stuff like the Crusader, generally, when it comes to these types of machines, you can understand their ground pounding capability, but also the fact that, you know, SAMs are generally pretty strong. A lot of them got put up in BR recently, but still are in that area. So low and going fast on vehicles like this is probably the way to go. And being able to face them, you know, against the enemies pretty quickly, and getting in there, getting the ordnance off, and then running away again is probably the best way of dealing with these things, if you're able to. In air realistic, the fact that you have 4 missiles and the fact that you have these wonderful guns means that if you put yourself into a position where you can attack the enemy quite aggressively, then generally you will be able to do a decent amount of damage to them. And the main problem with aircraft like this, which is something that we see not just with the Crusader, but also with other aircraft around this BR, is if they get up-tiered in a battle. Normally, if you have to rely on missiles, if you have to rely on all those things, and maybe your turning isn't the best, or maybe your other characteristics aren't the best, then you're just going against better planes, and therefore skill gets involved, and sometimes your skill can be fine, and other times you'll get screwed. It's a little bit of an issue in general. The other thing is the fact that this plane has no countermeasures. It has nothing which can actually stop vehicles from just annihilating you, which is, well, kind of very sad. There's no other way to put it. So there is the wonderful F-4EJs. And yes, if you wanted to know, this thing still ribs its wings. So that is something which will happen. It will wing overload crash, which is one of its major issues. I wanted to show it to you, just because of the fact that a lot of people were asking about it earlier. So if you turn at high speeds, yes, it will rip itself apart. The other thing about the Crusader is with the fact it has no countermeasures, with the fact that it has, you know, no flares, no chaff or anything like that, if you are put in a position where you have to defend yourself, it's going to be very hard to do because you can't maneuver that much because of the limits that it has. You can't, you know, try and get the missiles off you. You're kind of stuck in a bad position. So positioning is very important in this thing because of that simple fact. If you can position yourself where you can then go in an aggressive, offensive way, you can do really well. If you position yourself where maybe it's not as defense, or maybe it's in a defensive posture and somebody gets behind you, such as an F-4 or something like that, then you're going to have a pretty horrific time. It's not going to be fun. You're going to be in what we would class as a horrible position, and you're generally just not really going to be able to do too much. You're just going to have a horrific time around the place. So for me, when it comes to stuff like the Crusader, I'm sure at the 10 OBR, since it doesn't get the full matchmaking of the top tiers, it will be generally good, and at the same time, you're going to get caught out a lot if your positioning is pretty bad. And I'm sure many individuals will be able to do it properly, you know, will be able to push around and have a good time. But for me, as somebody who maybe is not as experienced at this top tier jet stuff, what's going to happen is I feel like I'm going to get caught out a lot, and it's not going to be too fun. We'll have to see what goes on when it comes to these things. Hopefully that isn't the case. Hopefully instead it's a fun experience for many and they can have a great time. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd like to thank BRFC, Swollen Ostrich, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe A, Conte Baraka, Eugens Terry, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Martinez, B. Young, Lafouche, Barine, and Samuel Schlick for supporting the channel.